Good afternoon, welcome, and thank you for joining us for today's program, History at High Noon, Variety Vacation Land Behind the Scenes. My name is Stacy and I handle adult education here at the Museum of History, and we're so glad that you're joining us for today's lunchtime lecture program. History at High Noon is just one of many exciting virtual offerings available through MOH. So if you'd like to learn more, we invite you to head over to the museum's website at www.ncmuseumofhistory.org. That website is also where you can learn more about shopping in our wonderful museum shop, as well as becoming an associates member. Our associates and foundation provide crucial funding and support to the museum, which in addition to many other things, helps make programs like today's program possible. We would also like to take this opportunity to thank those of you who graciously donated funds towards today's program. We do our best to keep our programs free to attend, but there are costs associated with keeping these series going. We just continue to be so appreciative of your generous support of the museum. A few housekeeping tips for today. We ask that you please keep your mics muted throughout the entirety of today's program, and to please type any questions that you have for our speaker into the chat function, which is located at the bottom center of your screen. At the end of the talk, I will ask our speaker as many of your questions as time allows. All right, so it is my honor to introduce today's speaker, Katie Edwards, who is the curator of popular culture here at the North Carolina Museum of History. Katie is a Smithfield, North Carolina native who attended the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, earning a degree in history and eventually a master's degree in public history from North Carolina State University. She has worked with us here at the museum since 2007, where she has been fortunate enough to curate exciting exhibits like Starring North Carolina, Toy Boom, and most recently, Are We There Yet? North Carolina's Variety Vacation Land. Okay, Katie, I'm going to turn it over to you. Welcome.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Here we go. Well, thanks for joining on this dreary day here in Raleigh. I'm just going to go ahead and apologize in the beginning. I'm not really dealing well with allergies this season, so if I have to mute a couple of times to take some water or something, I'll try to do that to spare you all. But thanks for joining. Like Stacy said, I've been at the museum since 2007. And I have to say that this exhibit was probably one of the most challenging exhibits I've worked on here for a number of reasons. First of all, we were assigned this topic of tourism right when the pandemic started last year. So everything started shutting down. It was just kind of an unprecedented time. I had never worked from home. And it was just kind of like a scary time, to be honest. We didn't know what was coming. And exhibits are like a real collaborative process. And so we work as a team. We have conservators, we have registrars, designers, graphic designers, and we're all just working together to kind of brainstorm ideas for an exhibit. And we couldn't do that for this exhibit. We all had to work remotely. I'd never, like many of you probably, had never done a Zoom call before, a Zoom meeting. And so it was just challenging in that regard. Also, the exhibit space we have for this exhibit is on our third floor, and it's a gallery that's usually dedicated for photo exhibits and panel exhibits, but it's not a huge space. And so we had such a big topic here. And one question I get asked a lot is what exactly a curator does, or what do we do, and what is one? And I like to say that one of our many roles is we're kind of like the storyteller of an exhibit. So we like to tell stories. Even when we get artifacts, kind of a side note, even when we get artifacts, we really like artifacts with stories associated with them. So for instance, my my artifacts are like toys, or that's part of my artifacts. And I don't want a doll that is still in its package that's brand new and perfect condition. I want a doll that has a story, like your grandmother gave you this doll. And so that's really important for museums now. And so I wanted to tell the story, kind of narrow down the focus of just tourism, the story of Variety Vacation Land campaign. I had come across this, the Variety Vacation Land campaign in a previous exhibit we did on postcards many years ago. And so I decided to kind of focus on that and make that the prime topic and use that as like all the primary materials throughout the exhibit. And so what you'll see in this exhibit are a lot of the photographs in the exhibit are vintage photographs of site, not necessarily that were in the Variety Vacation Land campaign, like in the booklets, but they're the sites the campaign promoted. But also I wanted to include, of course, those sites that the campaign didn't promote. So which included many of those sites, the limited sites that were available to African Americans and people of color during this period. And so on that third floor gallery, there's not a lot of space. And as such, even though I narrowed the focus down to Variety Vacation Land, it's just, I couldn't include everything. And so we definitely wanted to include a couple of media components that could kind of include and show us more content, show visitors more content. And so to the left there, you have it's kind of in the shape of a historical marker like you see going down the highway. And we included a screen that goes through even more photos, vintage photos with captions throughout. And another challenge we had when we were planning for this exhibit is when we opened, we were kind of hoping to open at a time when, everything was going back to normal and people could start traveling again. So this would be a way to promote these sites from a historical perspective. But we didn't know, if people would be able to touch things or what was going to happen, because it was just the unknown. And so this actual media component, you don't touch. It just kind of goes through in a loop, and you can see a lot of different photos from throughout the state. The interactive we have on the right here is, so in museums today, it's really important, especially our museum, it's important that we have something, we like visitors to be able to contribute content. And so this Instagram interactive is a way that visitors can submit their own favorite North Carolina vacation photo, or maybe a site they didn't see in the exhibit, their favorite site. And so you just use the hashtag NC Vacation Land and it'll appear on the screen. And so this one in the back is a picture of me and my brothers actually at Cape Hatteras many moons ago. But we just wanted visitors to be able to submit content as well. So with any photography we use in exhibits, we have to have photos that we call in high resolution. So that means they were scanned in a higher resolution. And that can be difficult, especially because if you don't have the original photograph. And for instance, so when I was planning this exhibit and trying to find photos, I came across this one on Mount Mitchell from the 1930s, and it was part of the state parks collection. And we could never find the original photo. And so as you can see, if we try to blow this up and make it nice, it just wouldn't work because it's not in high resolution. It just is kind of like a pixelated blur. And so unfortunately, I couldn't use that photo. And that happens frequently. Us curators will find a photo we really want to use in an exhibit, we think has a great message, a great story. And if we can't find a good version, then we just can't use it. So I contacted Mount Mitchell and they sent me a really nice color photo of the old tower at Mount Mitchell, which you'll see in a little bit. Here's another example of a photo that I found online of Walton Street Pool and Park in Asheville. And this was a site that I wanted to include that was recommended to me as a site that serves the Black and Brown community in Asheville. And so this photo on the left, I really liked, I saw online. Again, I was working completely from home, which is unprecedented as well. And so I could just never find that original photo or the holder of the photo. And so luckily UNC Asheville sent me this really nice color photo of the same pool, and that I used instead. Because we have to find really good quality photos especially for a photo exhibit, or anytime we do any exhibits with photos, we are really reliant on our collection as well as archives throughout the state and individual collectors. But archives, I was just really happy to work with this group. Again, they were in the same kind of boat I was, and that we were all working from home last year trying to figure out and navigate the waters of the pandemic. And I was really grateful that they were so responsive to me when I was requesting these photos from them. So sorry again that this graphic is a little blurry, but I wanted to kind of show you, this is kind of the idea. We wanted to include a map as well to kind of, I'm a visual person, and to kind of show where a lot of these sites were located in the state. Our graphic designer did a great job incorporating some vintage postcards as well to kind of, as a different way to showcase a lot of these sites. And these aren't even all the sites in the exhibit. These are just some, which kind of shows you how many sites we did include in this exhibit. So another challenge we had with this exhibit was the fact that we had a very, very small budget for exhibits for this particular exhibit. Again, it was the unknown. We didn't know how the rest of the year would play out. And so we recycle at the museum, and these gold frames around the panels were used in the film exhibit to hold movie posters. And so we worked to kind of to reuse those and to make these panels a little more durable, because there was also the idea that this exhibit would probably travel to various places afterwards. And so we have to plan when we design an exhibit like this for that. So they're all the same size to make them easy to pack up and travel. And so these are just kind of things that we have to consider when creating this exhibit. Also, so when I was wanting to tell the story of Variety Vacation Land, I completely immersed myself in everything I could find from home, from brochures to booklets to articles on Variety Vacation Land to the movies. And so I wanted to use that as a primary resource throughout the exhibit. And so you'll see these quotations like Nature's Wonderland on the wall. And those are kind of scattered throughout. And those are actual phrases from the guidebooks. And you see Playground of the Variety Vacation Land there. So here's kind of the layout of the gallery. We kind of thought that it would be nice to kind of lay it out in the form of a state of North Carolina. So when you walk in, you see the mountains to the left and the Piedmont in the central area and the coast to the right. And so when I was going through all the Variety Vacation Land stuff, I kind of came up with two sub-themes, and that was historical tourism and recreational tourism. So in each of these three regions, I kind of divide it in those two as well. And sometimes they overlap, but I tried to keep them, just divided a little bit. Here are some of the artifacts I chose. There was already a case built into the wall, and so it's kind of narrow and I couldn't fit anything big in there, but I tried to choose a variety of souvenirs, postcards. I think there's a brochure, and there's down in the bottom left, I know it's kind of hard to see, but it's a vintage ticket to the North Carolina State Fair, some vintage swim goggles to the left there. So just kind of a variety of things. Okay, so I know this is supposed to be a behind the scenes, and I'm trying to do some of that too, but it's kind of difficult to do a behind the scenes on just photography via Zoom. So I figured I would kind of talk some behind the scenes stuff like I've done, and talk about kind of what the exhibit's about as well. So tourism in North Carolina, there was tourism before the Variety Vacation Land campaign. I mean, Mount Mitchell was a state park in 1915, but it was very regionalized. And so it wasn't until Governor Omax Gardner here and a group of business leaders called the Carolinas Inc. got together and started really lobbying for a state-funded tourism industry. And North Carolina wasn't the only state doing this. There were other states pushing for a tourism industry, but North Carolina was certainly one of the earliest states, because a lot of states really started pushing for one after World War II. And so it was during the Great Depression, and Gardner and these business leaders thought that a tourism industry could bring in a lot of much needed revenue during the Great Depression. There's also other things going on in the 1930s to kind of support a tourism campaign. Because of the Great Depression, there is relief organizations like the WPA, the Works Progress Administration, and the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, are employing out of work people to create these recreational spaces like Hanging Rock State Park, like Umstead, like those are some of the many state parks throughout North Carolina that was created by these people, and they would clear out hiking trails and create picnic areas. And so this is happening in the 1930s. Also, the Blue Ridge Parkway starts construction in the 1930s. The Great Smoky Mountain National Park is established, in the 1930s. North Carolina already has a really great road system, thanks to the Good Roads campaign, which I'll talk about in just a second. So this is all really supporting a tourism industry. So finally, in 1937, the Division of State Advertising is created. And that same year, they release a full color tourist guide called North Carolina, a Variety Vacation Land. And so that kind of starts this whole campaign. And after that, there's just numerous color guides, tourist guides, brochures, postcards. These are just some I found in a Google search. So these are just what I could find online. There's just so many. I know in the right there, there's it's kind of hard to see, but there's a newspaper article there. Again, more postcards. There's even other memorabilia. There are billboards and matchbooks, and these are just in the decades to come. Ashtrays. There is a Variety Vacation Land TV program on WUNC TV in the 1950s. There is a Miss Variety Vacation Land. And here we have a photo of North Carolina Governor Terry Sanford with the North Carolina Variety Vacation Land information trailer in the 1960s. So this campaign has continuously continued to be bolstered by governors after Gardner. There are films that I watched that I mentioned earlier in the 1940s and 50s. And if visitors can come into the exhibit, they can actually see clips of these. And it's really nice color footage if you can get past the really terrible organ music in the background. There's also a jingle. So any North Carolinians who grew up in the 1960s here probably has heard this jingle, and it rotates in a loop, and it's kind of annoyingly catchy. So I have to say that. So the Good Road State, in the early 20th century, North Carolinians really put a lot of money into restoring the roads, called the Good Roads campaign. And that led to the nickname for North Carolina, the Good Road State. And so this was a really big point of promotion in the Variety Vacation Land campaign. They, a lot of the brochures talked about, we have some of the best roads and highways in the South. And so come and that's why we decided even more in this exhibit to kind of focus on the road trip. And so you won't see anything in this exhibit about RDU or any of the airports or trains or buses. It's just mainly the road. And so you can even see on the billboard there, welcome to North Carolina, Variety Vacation Land. And on the right here, we have a photo of the Blue Ridge Parkway. And on the bottom graphic here is actually a graphic from the Variety Vacation Land, one of their booklets, and talking about how easy it is to travel around the proximity to everything in North Carolina. So it's really always pushing this road trip. And so with better roads came better accommodations. And so after World War II, Governor Cherry really pushed for more economic accommodations. And so you had the rise of these motor courts or tourist courts, which would have been precursors to motels. And up there on the top, you have the White Marlin Motor Court in Nags Head. And on the right here, the Manger Motor Inn in Charlotte, which Charlotte was really promoted as this kind of modern city. And so that's why I kind of like this photo. It had this year-round bubble dome over the pool. And I remember reading somewhere that if both doors were open at the same time of the bubble would start to deflate. Although I'm not sure if that's true, but I thought it was kind of fun. But of course, these were only open to white travelers during this period. For African Americans and people of color traveling through the segregated South, the Green Book was a real and valuable resource. It was didn't just show people where, like hotels, where to stay, where to eat, but there was also places of business where they could patron. And so I wanted to include 3 here. We had the Biltmore Hotel in Durham, Rabbit's Motel in Asheville in the bottom left there, and the Monte Carlo by the Sea Resort in the Sea Breeze area out near Wilmington. And so I really wanted to find an actual copy of the Green Book for this exhibit, but unfortunately they're just really hard to find. But I do recommend, if you're interested in learning more about the Green Book in North Carolina, to visit the North Carolina African American Heritage Commission has this really great project called Oasis Spaces. And it really covers and talks all about the North Carolina Green Book, and they have an exhibit as well. So I highly recommend checking that out. So the Coastal Plain region, the Coastal Plain was advertised as recreation meets history with white sand beaches, fun festivals, and historic picturesque towns. But so unlike today, where most historic sites are much more inclusive and tell much more of a diverse history, most historic sites throughout the region during the era of Variety Vacation Land focus solely on this romanticized white elite history, which was the case not just in the South. I mean, it was the case everywhere during this period. And so I wanted to talk about that and mention that in the exhibit because I want people, when visitors come and visit these sites, these great sites throughout our state, they can see how much history has changed. I mean, sites during this period didn't mention at all, or with little interpretation about the roles and contributions of enslaved Africans, African-American citizens, and American Indian people. But today, a lot of these historic sites really have a much more inclusive and diverse interpretation. So I wanted to point that out. Here are some of the photos. We have Tryon Palace in New Bern, which was restored and reopened in the 1950s. And you can see the group of docents dressed in the colonial gear, their dresses. On the right there, we have the teapot from monument that commemorated the Edenton Tea Party to protest taxes. And down below, so a lot of the Civil War sites throughout North Carolina and the coastal region really were promoted with this kind of Old South charm throughout. And so we have Orton Plantation outside of Wilmington, which is a really popular spot in the Variety Vacation Land campaign. But a lot of these sites dedicated to antebellum and Civil War history were restored and developed as the Civil War centennial approached in the 1950s and 1960s. And sites like Bentonville Battleground in Johnston County, the right photo down there, was acquired by the state because of this centennial approaching. And because I mentioned this, in each region of the exhibit, I try to focus on one person who I felt like in each of the regions that really contributed to North Carolina tourism. And so for the coastal area, I wanted to mention Dorothy Redford, who became the site manager at Somerset Place Historic Site in the 1980s. She had originally traveled there to trace her ancestors. And when she got there, like so many other plantation sites in the state, there was no interpretation, no mention of the enslaved people who had worked there. And so when she became site director, she restored a lot of the slave dwellings, but she also wanted to include the stories of the enslaved people there. And that became part of the interpretation there. And that actually became, her interpretive changes served as a national example throughout the country. Other historic sites throughout the coastal area, the Lost Colony was a real popular kind of topic in the Variety Vacation Land campaign. It was kind of promoted as history meets mystery. Even the film had several scenes from the Lost Colony outdoor drama, the Wright Brothers National Memorial, and of course the USS North Carolina, which came to Wilmington in the 1960s. Pirates, like today, were a really popular topic in the Variety Vacation Land campaign, especially Blackbeard. Here we have a photo of the inaugural Pirate Jamboree in Nags Head. Coastal fun. So recreation, again, was another of the kind of sub themes that I saw. The Azalea Festival and other agricultural festivals were really big draws throughout the coast, like the rest of the state. Here we have an image of the Azalea Festival in Wilmington, and where Andy Griffith, the actor, was the MC in 1958. Because we focus on the road trip in this exhibit, I thought it would be kind of fun to add this image here of the kicking machine. And I think I remember the kicking machine or something like it off Highway 70 when I used to travel to the coast when I was a kid, and it was always really fun. And we actually have the kicking machine artifact in our collection. And I thought about originally adding it to the exhibit, but unfortunately it's kind of large. It needed some conservation work. And so our conservator is actually working on it for a future exhibit that will open next year. So hopefully you can actually see it in person again if you remember seeing it. There were a number of public beaches that were really popular for white tourists during the Variety Vacation Land campaign, like Wrightsville Beach near Wilmington, Carolina Beach, and Atlantic Beach near Morehead City and Beaufort. And I don't know, this photo is from the 1930s, and the crowd to me, even today, it's like a little much. But of course, these beaches were only accessible to white people, white travelers. So I wanted to include some beaches that opened and were accessible to Black and brown people as well. There was Seabreeze, which was most popular from the 1920s and the 1950s. It was also known as Freeman's Beach, and it offered hotels, dance halls, a fishing pier, and an array of food stands supplied with fish and clam fritters. Here we have Monte Carlo by the Sea, which I mentioned earlier. It was had featured a dining area that doubled as a dance floor at night and facilities for beachgoers. Unfortunately, it was destroyed in 1954 by Hurricane Hazel and never rebuilt. Ocean City on North Topsail Island drew a large tourist crowd, and its Black-owned fishing pier was immensely popular among visitors. The ocean front beach community also included cottages, a motel, and a restaurant and a chapel. Hammocks Beach was one of the few beaches accessible to people of color in the 1950s. It was originally a private vacation site, and it came under control of the North Carolina Teachers Association, an organization of Black teachers who opened the area for African-American tourists. And also wanted to plug that we're actually having another speaker talk about the history of Hammocks Beach, Dr. Crystal Sanders, on August 11th. So if you're interested in learning more about the history of Hammocks Beach, I definitely recommend checking out. There were several smaller beach areas open to people of color in North Carolina's Albemarle region, and among them were Bogues Beach, Lowe's Beach, Bias Shores, and Hargraves Beach. And Showan Beach here in Hertford County was one of the largest. And by the 1940s, the area included newly built guest cottages, bathhouses, picnic areas, a restaurant, and a dance hall. There was a German-made carousel, which was a popular attraction. And then it was also a major stop on what was called the Chitlin Circuit, which attracted Black musicians like B.B. King, James Brown, Ruth Brown, Billie Holiday, and Sam Cooke. North Carolina was also promoted as the land of lakes. So there were a lot of recreational lakes like Lake Waccamaw and Holtz Lake in Johnston County, Singletary Lake. And here we have an image of White Lake, who the area experienced rapid growth after the 1920s with public beaches, hotels, and arcade, amusement rides, and elaborate dances and gatherings. And right down the street from White Lake was Jones Lake State Park, which when it opened in 1939 was the first state park dedicated to African Americans. So they were right down the street from each other. And it was a 400-acre area and included some facilities for swimming, boating, picnicking, and other outdoor activities. So the Piedmont region was really promoted. I'd say the coastal and the mountain regions were really the highlighted areas in the Variety Vacation Land campaign, but the Piedmont was more the area of the commercial center of the New South. It was rich in memories, but promoted as a real modern area with progressive ideals, established universities, bustling cities, excellent arts institutions, and thriving industries. As you can see, there's a photo down here of the Natural Science Museum taken in the early 1970s. We have in the center here one of our tobacco factories. And then so early, even the films and early brochures really promoted these factories for tourists to come and they could tour these. So I think there were just like symbols of industry and modernity. And then on the right there, we have the Charlotte Coliseum. And so Charlotte was really as our largest city, just kind of the center and the hub of modernity as well. And the Charlotte Coliseum, I believe when it opened in 1955, had the largest unsupported dome in the world at the time. And so like the coast, the history in this region really focused on colonial era struggles, Civil War history, and 19th century historical elite figures like Andrew Johnson, James K. Polk, and Dolly Madison, who were born in the region. And even the Hall of History here on the top middle, which would eventually become the North Carolina Museum of History, really focused on this white history as well. Like I said earlier, most places did throughout the country. Here we have the Old Salem coffee pot, which became kind of an icon in Old Salem. And so this is kind of a way tourism did help the state, because a lot of the tourism dollars that came in helped restore and refurbish a lot of buildings in like Old Salem and other places throughout the state. And then I also included the Town Creek Indian Mound, who is still the state's only historic site focused on Native history. And because I did include, or the Variety Vacation Land never really talked about African-American history, I also wanted to include this little booklet here that was called The American Traveler's Guide to Negro History. And it was produced by the American Oil Company in the 1960s. And so they went through each state and kind of commented on a couple or sites that they felt were important to African-American history. And there were two for North Carolina. There was the North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance Building in Durham, which they suggested to visitors they could tour, and the John Chavis Memorial Park in Raleigh, as you can see in the bottom left there. So I include that booklet as well in the exhibit. Piedmont resorts were kind of the luxury vacations for people to visit sites at Pinehurst, Southern Pines, Sedgefield, and not only offered golf, but horseback riding, organized hunts, polo, tennis, and archery for tourists. And we actually have some clips from the Variety Vacation Land movie that talk about the golf in the Piedmont region and how these resorts were really popular. Like in the coast, festival fun was important. On the left there, we have an image from the Hollering contest in Spivey's Corner, and an image from the North Carolina State Fair, which was a big draw for visitors in the Piedmont region. Of course, state parks were really popular for recreation. They were advertised as natural wonders, providing contemporary comforts and modern amenities, along with miles of hiking trails, an abundance of lakes, rivers, and beautiful panoramic vistas, most reachable by good paved roads. Sites like Pilot Mountain, Laura Mountain State Park, Raven Rock State Park, and Hanging Rock, and all of those. So there were so many sites, so many state parks to visit in the Piedmont region. This was kind of a story I didn't know living in Raleigh and growing up in the area. I visited Umstead State Park many times, and it was originally called Crabtree Creek Recreational Area. And that top left photo, is of a group of African-American Boy Scouts that were at the Crabtree Creek Recreational Area in 1943. Well, that same year, it was deeded to the state and turned into a whites-only park, as you can see in the bottom left image. In 1950, 1,000 acres of this park was dedicated and turned into a park open for African Americans called Reedy Creek State Park. And in the 1960s, they were rejoined as Umstead State Park. And so the entrance for the Crabtree Creek State Park was in Raleigh, and the Reedy Creek State Park was in Cary. And so there's still two entrances to the Umstead State Park, which I didn't know about this until I started doing this research. And I think one of the most egregious things when I was reading about this is the fact that African Americans and people of color had to pay state taxes for a lot of these sites, like these state parks and public beaches, that they could not visit during this period, during this Jim Crow era. And our person to highlight in this region was Margaret Nygaard, who worked to save the Eno River from being dammed in the 1960s. And her advocacy and leadership helped create a new model for river conservation by promoting the river's natural resources through organized hikes, canoe trips, historical tours, and wildlife inventories. And finally, the mountains. Oh, sorry. The mountains were probably, I'd say, one of the most popular regions in the Variety Vacation Land campaign because there were so many sites that they promoted to tour. There was, it was nature's wonderland, and in particular, the Blue Ridge Parkway offered breathtaking vistas of North Carolina's natural wonders. And the Blue Ridge Parkway was described as the country's most scenic highway. There was the Great Smoky Mountain National Park, the Grandfather Mountain, or the state's tallest peak, Mount Mitchell. So these were all sites that were really promoted. So with influences that included Cherokee, African, and European traditions, craft heritage was an important part of the Appalachian history and mountain tourism. Visitors to the area supported artisans by purchasing jewelry, woodwork, pottery, textiles, and souvenirs from the shops throughout the region. And music and dance were other ways that visitors could take part in historical tourism. As a meeting ground for Scots-Irish, African, and other musical traditions, the mountain region combined the various musical forms and passed them down through generations, and visitors could observe traditional mountain dances like clogging and square dancing as well. So here we have a variety of images of square dancing at one of the ranches in the mountains. Here we have a group of dancers on the right that's celebrating the mountain heritage and Scottish dance at a May Day celebration in Asheville. On the bottom there, we have a tour shop for souvenirs and handicraft store in Arden. And then on the right, visitors are kind of observing craft work in Cherokee. So Cherokee was another really popular site in the Variety Vacation Land campaign. Brochures and guidebooks recommended that visitors visit the Qualla Boundary, home of the Eastern Band of the Cherokee Indians, where they could learn about the area and, of course, pose for pictures with Indian chiefs and purchase what they deemed as authentic Indian souvenirs. And so you here on the left, you see a couple of visitors and tourists posing with this Indian chief, and this was called chiefing. And so tourism in Cherokee really took off in the 1940s with the formation of the Cherokee Historical Association, CHA, which is a group that included a lot of white business leaders from outside the reservation and some Cherokee tribal members. And they are the ones who created the drama Unto These Hills, which premiered in 1950. I think that the issue here was that a lot of this tourism really kind of portrayed the Cherokee as this kind of stereotypical Hollywoodized version of what was so popular on TV and film during that time. It was these large feather headdresses standing beside teepees by souvenir shops. And so it was kind of using the Cherokee history and culture as an attraction to bring people in. And today, the Museum of the Cherokee Indians has expanded, includes more interactives to better reflect the 11,000-year history of the Cherokee people. And several authors have worked with the community input to update the outdoor drama Unto These Hills, which was originally written by a white author, Kermit Hunter, who almost, was portraying this Trail of Tears tragedy as more kind of theater than history. And also street signs in the area are now bilingual and include both Cherokee language and English. So Cherokee has changed a lot. This was kind of like, to me, a more, a darker side, kind of an exploitation of the Cherokee culture for tourism purposes. So like the other regions, mountain festivals were a big draw. Site festivals like the Gem Festival in Spruce Mine, the Mineral and Gem Festival in Spruce Mine, the Grandfather Mountain Highland Games, the harvest festivals like the Apple Blossom Festival, and music festivals like the Mountain Dance and Folk Festival. And we have the Cherokee Fair here on the top right. So fishing was a popular activity in the mountain region, also to draw in recreation. This was actually a photo that I found from the state archives of Mills Creek, which was located near Mount Mitchell. And I just thought it was interesting because I remember reading somewhere that sites for women only were so popular. Well, this particular site was so popular that numerous other ones popped up, but I don't know much about it. So I'd be curious to know if anyone else knows more about these fishing sites for women only. The Blowing Rock and Tweetsie Railroad were other draws to the area promoted by the Variety Vacation Land campaign. The Tweetsia Railroad, which opened in 1957, had a lot of Wild West and Western themed train rides and stage gunfights, and other theme parks soon followed, including Maggie Valley's Ghost Town in the Sky, Cherokee's Frontierland, and Santa's Land Fun Park and Zoo, and Beach Mountain's Land of Oz. The Great Smoky Mountain National Park always talked about there's so much to see and do in this area. And one of the frequent photos and kind of things they kind of focus on are the bears alongside the roads there. And what was so interesting to me is that the early guidebooks and early films talk about how semi-tame the bears are and how they're friendly. And they actually have, you know, people posing with them or kind of near them. But later guidebooks are definitely like, stay away from the bears. That was kind of funny. I included this image to show you, this is of the Cataloochee Dude Ranch in the mountain area. And to show you kind of how the work that goes into photos. And so you can see in the top left, that's how we receive the photo, and just the work that our photographers and our graphic designers do to really make each image, they clean them up and do a lot of tedious stuff to them to make them look the best they can look, in my opinion. And these are like stuff that I can't do. So it really is a team effort to make this exhibit look the best it can. Asheville was promoted as the kind of modern city of the west of Western North Carolina with magnificent views, community of crafters and artisans, world-renowned resorts, and an array of popular attractions like the Biltmore Estate and other resorts like the Grove Park Inn. So those were popular draws to this area. But I had to also mention that the tourism industry in North Carolina owed a lot to people of color, Black and brown people, because they served a lot of these service roles and service jobs, underpaid service jobs that really kept the tourism industry going, these resorts going throughout the state. And here we have an image of the staff, the male staff members at the Grove Park Inn in the 1930s. And they served in these resorts, these service roles in these resorts that they couldn't patronize. We have Chimney Rock and Mount Mitchell. Here is the replacement photo I was talking about earlier, which is really nice vintage image of the old tower at Mount Mitchell. And then Chimney Rock, which originally opened in 1885 as a private park with a simple staircase to the top, but didn't officially open to the public until 1916, which I visited Chimney Park last year, and I can't imagine going to the top, not having that elevator to the top. It was definitely a struggle, so I can't imagine just a simple staircase. This is just a fun photo of Lake Lure. It was another popular recreational topic in Variety Vacation Land to visit. And I really don't know what's going on in this photo, except it looks like she's being pulled on the road by a boat, and it looks extremely dangerous, but it's just kind of a fun photo that I wanted to include. And here's another fun photo of the ski lift ride. And I was talking about how commercial ski resorts in North Carolina became popular with tourists really in the 1960s. But they were open year round, and in the off seasons, they offered outdoor activities like golf, tennis, hiking, and horseback riding. And finally, we end with our person in the mountains, Hugh Morton, who really contributed so much to the tourism industry in the state through his photography. I'm sure a lot of his photographs did appear in campaign and booklets throughout. And he, after inheriting Grandfather Mountain in 1952, not only worked to preserve its wildlife and natural resources, but also added new attractions like the mile-high swinging bridge, so visitors could enjoy the area's breathtaking views. He also helped found the Grandfather Mountain Highland Games and the Singing on the Mountain Gospel Festival. And he was not just a photographer, but he was a conservationist, businessman, and did so much. He helped bring the USS North Carolina battleship to Wilmington and helped save a lot of the lighthouses as well. So he was really important to North Carolina tourism. And that's it.
Thank you so much, Katie. That was so awesome to get a behind the scenes look and also to learn some great history surrounding the exhibit. We have quite a few questions for you. The first one is, where does the Green Book fit into the history of tourism in our state?
I wish I could have even included more about the Green Book because it was so important for people of color. They during the Jim Crow South, that they couldn't visit a lot of these public spaces. Like I was saying, they had to pay state taxes, especially the people who lived here, and they couldn't visit these public beaches and they couldn't visit these other sites. And so the Green Book was that reference guide, that kind of that rock that helped them find those sites that were welcoming. So those places that they could stay in these resort towns. And so it was so vital for those people who were not welcome at the other sites, these other motels that were accommodating to white visitors.
Absolutely. What was your favorite part about working on this exhibit?
My favorite part. It's kind of a catch-22 because it was hard during the pandemic when we couldn't travel anywhere to look at these really great sites. And growing up in the state, I've actually visited a lot of these sites before. And so it was kind of a fun throwback to, I've visited Chimney Rock and Tweetsie Railroad and a lot of the coastal sites before. So it kind of brought back good memories, and I was really looking forward to going to those places again. But it was hard because we couldn't travel anywhere during that time. So I'd say that, but it was like, kind of a catch-22. So
is there a book based on this exhibit that we're going to be selling in the museum shop? Do you know?
There is not a book. And that's just kind of it. There isn't that much out there. I mean, I feel like tourism as like a historical topic is pretty new. And so it's kind of like, I think there's a lot more to delve into in this topic. And I hope other people keep going and find out more. And I feel like that's why I'm excited about this Dr. Crystal Sanders talk. And there's some other talks out there that really talk about a lot of these sites and the tourism and the history of tourism. Unfortunately, there's not a book, but I hope there's more research done on this topic for sure.
What was it like to decide which photos actually made it into the exhibit? Was that really difficult?
Let's stop share here. Was it difficult to choose the photos? Yes, it was difficult because there were so many really great photos that I found that I could not include all of them on the panels. And so that's why we decided to use that extra screen to show as much content. And, it was funny because I think the other teammates that were on the team were like, we're already showing enough. We don't show anymore. And I'm like, no, we need more. We need more. I need to, I just kept trying to throw in as much as I could because it's just hard. Being a North Carolinian, it's hard to choose which sites to show. That's why I try to stay with the Variety Vacation campaign to kind of restrict myself, but I definitely wanted to include. And that's why the Instagram interactive is really important too, because that way visitors can contribute their own favorite site or their own favorite memory. And so that's why that was really important as well.
Our next question is, did you explore the role that camping played in travel to these areas at all?
The camping, I didn't, to be honest. A lot of photos really did show a lot of how important campsites were because they were such an economic kind of way that families could travel together cheaply. And, it's kind of like that bonding time, I can imagine, because that's, when I camped with my family as a child, it was a way to save money, but still go somewhere different and kind of be out in nature and have fun. It's weird, the Variety Vacation Land campaign definitely promoted that, but also with like the side of modernity and saying like, they have great paved roads that can take you to these great campsites with lots of accommodations and whatnot. And so it was kind of like I didn't, but I definitely came across camping a lot in the exhibit and my research.
Any chance of getting reproductions of the vintage postcards or photos that you shared or mentioned in your talk?
That is an excellent question that I haven't even considered. I'm sure there's a way. So with the State Archives collection, a lot of these collections are online and you can find them there and actually download several of them yourself. I know the State Archives has a lot of that stuff available to everyone. But if there's a certain specific photo that you see in the exhibit and you're interested in, you can always email me and I can try to find out. My email address is katie.edwards@ncdcr.gov, and I think Stacy can maybe type that in. And if there's something you see and you want, and just send me an email and I can see what I can do.
Okay, it's in the chat, guys. Our next question is, did you come across anything about Fontana Lake as part of the tourism efforts?
Yes, so Fontana Dam and Fontana Lake were another one of those sites that they didn't make the panels, unfortunately, but they were really big in the Variety Vacation Land campaign. So I think I did include a photo of that in the screen, the rotating screen. And it was, I remember Fontana Dam and Fontana being like a real, which I didn't know, which was a really big honeymooning site, the Fontana Village and everything. And so there was a lot of images that I came across of like honeymooning couples there, which I thought was kind of interesting. But it was popular in the Variety Vacation Land campaign for sure.
Kind of a similar question. Are there any reprinted copies of Variety Vacation Land guidebooks that are available anywhere? Is that something else that you could find through the archives?
I'm not sure. I'm sure the archives, we have a couple in our collection, and honestly, I think you can find some. When I was doing my kind of just showing you early on all the different examples of the Variety Vacation Land kind of covers and books that came out, there's a lot for sale out there, to be honest. So, and I don't think, I mean, I'm not, they're pretty affordable, because I think there was just so many that went out. So I definitely recommend just looking on like eBay or just Google, and I think you can find some for sale for reasonable prices.
Okay, great. Our next question is, what area out of coastal Piedmont and mountains were you most familiar with before jumping into this project? And which one did you leave feeling like you learned the most about?
So I grew up going to the coast a lot, and not necessarily the mountain. We didn't go to the mountains that often, and I've been going to the mountains more as an adult. And so that was kind of an interesting way to learn. I think to me, the surprising part was the coast, the coastal part, because I grew up going there, and I did not, I grew up in the 80s, and so 80s and 90s. And so I didn't know much about segregated North Carolina because I didn't have to live it. And so it was interesting learning about Hammocks Beach, as it was once a site open to African Americans, because I've been there numerous times, and it was just so interesting learning about its history and all these other sites too as well, in Elizabeth City and the Albemarle region. And so I think that was probably learning, I learned so much about all the history and all the regions. And so I think that's one of the best parts about being a curator. It's like, I'm no expert in any of this, but I love to learn. And so I'm constantly learning new things. And so that's what makes this job really fun.
Any idea about how the North Carolina Welcome Centers fit into the Variety Vacation Land campaign?
I really don't have an answer to that. I think this was all through early state organizations that no longer exist anymore. And, I've been asked before, what happened to the Variety Vacation Land campaign? Like, why did it go away? And I really don't have an answer for that either. I remember reading somewhere that the First in Flight campaign slogan really kind of took over and became kind of our big tourism motto. But I'm not sure if that's why. I don't know if it just fizzled out or if it just kind of had run its course. So yeah, I don't have an answer for that either.
Okay, last question. Is there anything that you would change about the exhibit if you could, now that it's completed and you can step back and look at all your hard work?
Yeah, there were several, we were kind of in a time crunch trying to get this done. And there are definitely some aspects that I wish I could have included in the exhibit. I wanted to include more like oral histories of travelers throughout this region who went to Seabreeze or Chowan Beach, who went to Grandfather Mountain, who went to these sites. And it would have been really fun to Cherokee to include this oral history. But we just kind of ran out of time. And that's something I wish I could have included. I'm trying to think of any other things. I'm sure there are more, if we had had more budget or more time. A digital map maybe, or something that showcased all these sites would have been really fun. But unfortunately, just we didn't have the budget or time. So maybe for the future, we can add those.
And during a pandemic, no less. So
Right, exactly.
incredible. Yeah. All right. Well, that wraps up our program for today. Katie, thank you so much for this awesome behind the scenes look at our new exhibit, Are We There Yet? Guys, if you haven't visited the exhibit yet, the museum is open Tuesday through Sunday. So we invite you to come on down and check it out. And if you enjoyed today's program, we hope that you enjoy and you will join us for our next adult program, which is happening tomorrow evening, Thursday, May 13th, entitled History and Highballs Meshuggah with North Carolina chef Rob Clement, and that starts at 7 p.m. You can visit our website, www.ncmuseumhistory.com .org to learn more about that. Thanks, guys. Have a great day.
Thank you.